All right, now we're going to talk about the cardiovascular system and how exercise affects it. Why we're all here. Exercise affects our bodies in several different ways. I'll start out with the heart rate. You've all been to a class or feel your heart pounding or even just your lack of breath. Well, what you're feeling is your body's response to an increase in intensity or movement for that matter. So we've got our heart rate. Specific definition, heart rate is the number of beats per minute that your heart makes. Now what a beat is every time that left ventricle squishes blood out through the aorta to the rest of the body. So however many times it does that in a minute, that is your heart rate in that instance. We have a resting heart rate, which is a typical indicator of cardiovascular health, but also is a good starting point to base how your intensity has affected your heart rate. So resting heart rate in women is typically higher than a man's resting heart rate. Gender differences are involved in heart rate. Age is also a factor. Children have higher heart rates, and elderly people have lower heart rates than your average adult. As we become more conditioned, as we improve our aerobic fitness, our cardiovascular fitness, as we improve our fitness, our heart rate goes down. And the reason our heart rate goes down is because we've improved how our body responds to each beat. To each squish of blood that enters our body, we become more efficient at using the oxygen and nutrients that are in that beat's worth of blood. Another reason that our heart rate decreases is something called stroke volume. I'll address that most specifically on the next slide, but know this, in its response to exercise, heart rate increases in a linear fashion with the work rate and oxygen uptake during dynamic exercise. So as we exercise, our body's physiological response to that increased amount of work is for our heart rate to increase. All right, the blood pressure. Blood pressure, we all have had the cuff wrapped around our arm. Blood pressure is measuring two different numbers. There's the systolic and the diastolic blood pressures. The systolic is the number on top. The diastolic is the number on bottom. The systolic blood pressure has to do with the pressure on the arterial walls during a contraction of the heart muscle. The diastolic pressure, the bottom number, the smaller number typically, represents the pressure within the heart itself after it has contracted and relaxed. So when the heart muscle relaxes, the amount of pressure within that chamber is our diastolic blood pressure. An average blood pressure is 120/80. There's a disease state that we have become extremely familiar with of late called hypertension, and that is a chronically elevated blood pressure. To have hypertension, you have to have had 3 consecutive readings of elevated blood pressure. The numbers that dictate whether your blood pressure is high is if your systolic is over 140 or your diastolic is above 90. If both of them are above, or just one of the two are above, you are considered to be in a hypertensive state. Now, response to exercise. The systolic blood pressure increases with increasing levels of exercise, level being duration or intensity. Maximal values can get up to 190, that's for the systolic, to 220. So that upper number can get up pretty high, and that's okay. It's how it comes back down afterwards that is a better directive of your health. Now, the diastolic blood pressure may decrease with exercise. So the systolic will go up. That's because your heart's beating faster, you're getting more blood into the system quicker because it's needed faster. So that pressure is going to go up in response to exercise. Now, the chamber of the heart that keeps squirting it out, because it's got an increased demand, that pressure is going to go down more so that it is able to pull more in. When you've got a difference in pressure, a given anything wants to move from a high pressure to a low pressure situation. So by having that lower pressure, you're able to pull more blood into the left ventricle. All right, the stroke volume. I mentioned this with heart rate. When our heart rate is affected by our improvement in fitness, it's because of our stroke volume. It's because of our stroke volume and how our body absorbs what's in the blood, the nutrients and the oxygen. As it becomes more efficient at that and the stroke volume increases, heart rate, the heart doesn't have to beat as frequently to supply the body in a similar situation. Now, what the stroke volume is the volume of blood that the heart squeezes out each contraction. So as it becomes able to squeeze out more blood per contraction, you can see that it's getting more nutrients, more oxygen out with each beat. Therefore, it doesn't have to beat as much. Now, specifically as it depends on or responds to exercise, stroke volume increases with the work rate until it reaches a maximal level. It can only go so high, and once it's there, the oxygen is met by the heart rate. So your stroke volume can improve within oxygen, but it can only go so far. So to continue meeting the body's demand, the heart's going to have to beat faster. Sometimes that makes the stroke volume go down because the heart could be beating so fast that it doesn't have time to fill up with as much blood as it's capable of filling itself up with. In this example, that's what I just referred to, the disproportionate shortening of the diastolic filling time. So that part after the blood is contracted out of the heart, because it's got to beat again so quickly, there's not enough time for it to completely fill up. Now, cardiac output is a measure of cardiac fitness. It's how much your heart's able to meet with the body's demand. How much blood is it able to move through the body? Cardiac output, typically we're talking about the amount of blood that's circulating through our body. So in equation, Q is the quotient for cardiac output. It is heart rate times stroke volume. So the volume of blood that's being contracted out of the heart times how many times the heart beats in a minute tells us how much blood has moved out of the heart in any minute. Now, cardiac output, this is where we're understanding how math works with itself. But it should always increase because the stroke volume could increase because you're healthier. Or if you're not healthy and that stroke volume is not increasing, then the response to the intensity, the response from to the body's demand, the heart rate's going to have to go up. So one of these numbers is going to have to increase from any given comparison that you're trying to make. One of those numbers always will be increasing, so your number, the cardiac output will always increase. All right, important to understand, our body always needs blood moving through it. Now, at a given time, different proportions of blood are going to different parts of our body. I'm standing here talking to you. I'm having to think about all the things that I'm saying, so my brain's needing this a lot more than my calf muscles are because I'm not jumping up and down. If I switch my activities and I start jumping up and down and that takes over more of my energy, eventually more and more of my blood is going to have to focus on making that movement possible. And I'm going to start sounding delirious because I'm not getting as much blood to my brain. So at rest, 15 to 20% of our cardiac output goes to the skeletal muscles. So if I was just sitting here in a chair or lying down or sleeping, 15 to 20% of my blood is just fueling my body. The rest of it goes to my organs, goes to my heart, goes to my brain. Now you change that, you add in exercise, 85 to 90% can go to my working muscles. I'll use a marathon in an example here, or just any long duration activity. I'm not going to do intricate knitting or video games while I'm running forever. I don't have that if I've been running for 3 hours. I'm not going to do extensive math equations. You have trouble figuring out where you are sometimes. You don't want to eat anything. You get sick to your stomach because your body cannot support digestion, because all of this blood, all of the nutrients, all of the oxygen are going to making the running happen. It can't fuel all of the other parts, so they tend to shut down. Not shut down completely, but just not be able to function as optimally as they can at an easier, more comfortable state. Another important fact of exercise performance: how much oxygen can you take up from the hemoglobin that's in your blood? The oxygen, when we inhale and at the respiratory level, oxygen attaches to the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is associated with iron levels in our blood. So when your iron levels are good, or they're low even, when they're low, then there's less hemoglobin for oxygen to attach to. Therefore, with each breath, you're getting less oxygen than maybe you would be getting if your hemoglobin levels were higher. Also, that oxygen that's extracted, that's a very important word, the oxygen that's extracted from the blood, and how well it does that is oxygen extraction. And improving oxygen extraction, oxygen uptake, is a measure of cardiovascular fitness. How well are we using what our blood is trying to bring to us? That oxygen uptake, oxygen extraction is a part of something that we call aerobic capacity, or the VO2 max. That is the total capacity of our body to consume oxygen at the cellular level. It is also a direct representation of our aerobic capacity, maximal aerobic capacity. As hard as you can push yourself in one instance. So, what's the VO2 max? Depends on two different things. How much oxygen is getting to the muscles through what's coming in the blood through our heart and lungs. Also, how well is it getting the oxygen? Is it able to remove oxygen, to take it into those energy systems that we were talking about, the aerobic energy systems, so that we can use aerobic glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, and beta oxidation. If it's not able to keep up a steady flow of oxygen, it's going to have to rely on our anaerobic systems, and we all know that that doesn't last very long. Therefore, a direct correlation would be that your oxygen consumption, your VO2 max aerobic capacity, is lessened because the body isn't able to rely on those denser energy systems. So, knowing how to figure out your VO2 max, your aerobic fitness levels, you would multiply your cardiac output, the Q, by oxygen extraction. This is not a very applicable formula because you're not just going to have these numbers. But that's really what it comes down to at a simplified level. There's a whole lot of crazy equations that go into giving you those two values. But just know that the VO2 max is your cardiac output times your oxygen extraction. All right. Can we pause it for a second?